The Hogsty presents It's Just Business with Steve Thomas and Rich Rogers. And now, here's your host, Chris Larry.
Hello and welcome to another episode of It's Just Business, part of the Hogsty Network, where we discuss the dollars and cents of the sports media industrial complex. I'm joined by my regular cohorts, Rich and Steve. Steve, how you doing today?
I'm doing all right. I'm very happy that I'm down here in Texas in the warm weather, unlike you guys up north. I told you before the show I contemplated whether I might need to put on long pants today and decided it was wholly unnecessary, so that makes me happy.
And Rich, how are you doing underneath that parka?
I don't know. I mean, some people debate whether Maryland is the north or the south, but for today in the 20s, I consider it the north.
Well, technically, the Mason-Dixon line does run directly through the state, so schizophrenia ensues. All right, so we've got a lot to discuss this week. Lots going on all over the place. It's going to be a little bit NFL heavy, but we will. It's NFL season, so that makes perfect sense. I'm always reminded during this time of the year. If either of you watched The Sopranos, there was that one season that went during football season, and Carmelo was always complaining that Tony was busy, and it was because he was doing all the gambling, doing all the bookmaking. It's the busy season. So, and this time of the year always reminds me of Tony Soprano. It's the busy season. What do you want from me? All right, so let's jump right into it. Steve, our intrepid lawyer, has been tracking the legal beagle dealings of Ezekiel Elliott for some time. So, Steve, why don't you give us a quick update there? Because what we want to know is, will he be playing the next time Dallas-Washington play?
It's interesting because I think you could use this case as a case study in a federal civil procedure 101 class in law school at this point with all the gyrations it's been through. And the answer to your question is almost certainly Zeke will not be playing when the next Redskins game comes along, which is 4 weeks from this week. We're in week 10 right now. Just to summarize, as briefly and simply as I can, what has happened and where we're going in this case from here. The NFLPA and Zeke Elliott originally filed this lawsuit in federal court in Texas. The federal and asked for an injunction to stop the suspension pending resolution of this case. Okay, and the federal judge in Texas denied the injunction, and so it was appealed to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, which denied the injunction. I'm sorry, the federal court in Texas, I believe it granted it originally. The Fifth Circuit overturned it. And so once that happened at that point, there was no point in going forward with the case in Texas. So the NFLPA and Elliott refiled the case in federal court in New York, which is where the Brady case was heard, which was pretty dumb of them, but they were kind of out of options. And so then the federal trial judge in New York also denied Elliott an injunction staying the suspension. So then they appealed that denial to the Second Circuit Court of Appeals, and that court granted a 1-week extension pending their evaluation of the appeal of the injunction. What happened this past week on Thursday was that the Second Circuit then refused to impose an injunction on the stay of the suspension. So the actual lawsuit is still pending in the Second Circuit or in the federal trial court, but the suspension is not stayed. So the NFL instantaneously imposed the suspension. So the next thing is set in 4 weeks. So at a very bare minimum, Elliott will be suspended for at least 4 weeks. So that is where we stand now. Now the question is this, to me. Is this lawsuit in any way worth it for the NFLPA to go forward at this point, considering how much it's cost, if at a bare minimum Elliott will have already served 4 weeks of a 6-week suspension before the next hearing even takes place. So that's where I'd kind of throw it open to you guys.
Well, it's interesting because unless Zeke is counting on Ruth Bader Ginsburg taking up his case, and I believe Ginsburg is in charge of that second circuit.
It's the Supreme Court has a judge assigned to all the various geographical areas around the United States for purposes of the initial evaluation of a case presented to the Supreme Court, and Ruth Bader Ginsburg happens to be the judge for the New York area. That's what you mean. Right. Go ahead.
Yes. So unless the Supreme Court is going to be inclined to hear this, I think Zeke serves the suspension, and I think the bigger question is, as you mentioned, Steve, considering the cost, how far does this go? And I think that this is a Pandora's box. And something that maybe we can discuss at another time is that how much is too much in terms of the legal fees that are being incurred. And if I'm a member of the NFL Players Association, I would have questions about how far we take these cases, and is there a cap for how much this costs? I mean, we spoke offline yesterday. There was a call on the local radio about what's a guess on how much these legal fees would cost, and you told me to throw out there. I couldn't get through, but you told me to throw out there maybe about $800K. But No.
I told you $800K just for Zeke Elliott alone.
Okay,
what I said was at least $3 million for the NFLPA, because Elliott has personal counsel on this. He has a lawyer that he is paying that only represents him, and then the NFLPA has their counsel that represents the National Football League Players Association. So what I said was the NFLPA is taking the lead on this. They're paying their attorneys a lot more money. And so I said $3 million for them, which is probably high, and then Elliott maybe $800,000.
Okay, so I'm like, you know what? Look here, buddy. Serve the suspension and let's move on. So that's where I am.
Let's talk about the Supreme Court real fast. First of all, in order to even, before the NFLPA and Elliott could even file a writ with the Supreme Court, the United States Supreme Court, they'd need to ask the Second Circuit to hear the case again in what's called an en banc hearing, which is a hearing before the entire Second Circuit. And so those are very rare in which the courts of appeals will do that, but they have to ask that before they could even apply to the Supreme Court. I think that Elliott and the NFLPA have a very, very, very slim chance, if any at all, to get this case heard before the Supreme Court, because it's not the type of issue that is normally a Supreme Court issue. It's not. When it comes down to it, it's a contract problem, involving the CBA, a collectively bargained agreement between union and employer. And in this case, it's really not the type of thing that the Supreme Court does, because it's not a constitutional issue. It's not like a wide-reaching social issue, anything like that. So I think it's extremely unlikely that the Supreme Court would take a case like this, even if they bothered to do the en banc hearing before the Second Circuit in the first place.
This story has a lot of different twists and turns, which I won't go into right now. But the only thing that would make it, at this point, more bizarre is if the notorious RBG actually got involved. So considering how weird it's gotten, would it surprise me? No. Do I think it's logical? No. But this story is becoming so strange that it would not shock me to see her have to step in. But the one thing that's interesting is, from a football perspective, this ends up being incredibly dumb for the Cowboys, who I know weren't necessarily driving this, because this is a player grievance issue, but even for Ezekiel Elliott, first of all, let's remember that, without getting too much into the legal back and forth, the guy's in a situation for doing some pretty heinous things, or accused of, or whatever. So my sympathy for the guy already is low, considering that he's a Cowboy. Low considering his actions, but take your lumps, and you'd be playing by now, right? So now, when in the early part of the season, where they probably could have, just because it's NFL so weird week to week, could have survived with Alfred Morris, maybe back for the stretch run. So this just seems dumb for everyone involved, fiscally, football-wise, the way it's spiraling out of control, what it's up-leveling between the league and the Players Association, this just seems like one of those things where the seams are starting to rip.
Yeah, no, I think so. And if it were me, I would do exactly what you're suggesting. The thing from Elliot's perspective is he's always maintained his innocence of the charges. Now, I think the evidence shows he's not innocent, at least to the standard that the NFL needs to suspend him. And if at a minimum, something happened here. This woman is not making all this stuff up out of thin air just to blackmail him at this point. And the evidence I've seen shows that something happened. And if that's the case, yeah, he should have just taken his lumps. Because I said from the beginning, if you guys recall, when we've talked about this from the very beginning, that the NFLPA case had absolutely no shot to win ultimately. And the reason is, number one, there's precedent already. We've been down this exact same road with this exact same case, with these exact same arguments with the Brady case. Exactly. It's the same. They're alleging that the NFL abused their power under the CBA and didn't properly adhere to the evidentiary rules in the grievance. In the initial grievance hearing, which is just an arbitration. It's the same exact problem, and they're not saying anything new, and so it's just a huge waste of time. So when it comes to money, I'm totally with Rich. At one point is enough of enough. I mean, do they hate Roger Goodell so much that they're willing to spend millions upon millions of union dollars to chase something down a rabbit hole that's never going to come out?
It's something they may not even have to. They could have just sat on the sidelines in the end anyway, probably.
Right.
So not only it's the money, but it's also the accumulation of bad will going into a next collective bargaining agreement, plus a whole host of other issues that the league's got to deal with between the owners and the players. And so for one to go to the mat this much for one player seems like, if I'm rank and file on the rest of the union, both from a money and a strategy standpoint, my eyebrows are, starting to hit the top of my head.
Right. What's interesting is I'm more like a couple of things. I'm concerned, and I've always been concerned about the NFL's image when it comes to domestic battery or what have you. And I'm not going to get into the legals of whether he did it or not, but it's people's perception that the league is filled with domestic abusers and drug users and things like that. And I think that's a real issue for the NFL, that even an accused guy can continue to play, and it's all about Sunday. And the rights of the accused be damned. And whether that's correct or not, and Steve, you're a lawyer, and I know, players have rights and they have right to appeal and they have right to due process. But just the perception that that these players are still able to play under these allegations, I think is a real public image hit for the NFL.
I hear what you're saying. And yeah, the player is due what's called fundamental fairness in a grievance procedure under the collective bargaining agreement, and that's the whole basis of the legal of the case, is whether or not the process was fundamentally fair. But I think your point is worth addressing. There's been an accusation, and Elliot is playing through the accusation. And it must be said that there's a big difference between criminal trial evidentiary standards and NFLPA evidentiary standards. We've been over that before. But I have a big problem, and I always have, even in the most heinous of cases of convicting people in the court of a public opinion or in business, before the case has been evaluated in some way, shape, or fashion. Even, in the case of, say, Bill Cosby, a whole bunch of women have come out and accused Bill Cosby, before his deposition transcript was released a while ago from the case that was 10 years old, it was just raw accusations. Is it fair to convict Bill Cosby in the court of a public opinion just on the basis of accusations? In my opinion, no. In the case of Zeke Elliott, a woman accused him of something, and it was only later that we learned of the evidence. There's photos. We learned of the police investigation and whatnot. This happened to a Redskins player. Somebody help me out. Was it Jameson Crowder?
Yes. Yes,
Okay.
right after he was drafted, actually.
Yeah, a woman alleged that Jamison Crowder had abused a woman that was in a relationship with him, accused him of domestic violence, and as it turns out, it was a lie. And so I don't agree, and I never have, that in the case of domestic violence or sexual assault, that we should just automatically convict the accused just based on an allegation without evidence being presented first. And so that's the case with Elliott. But in this case, I think there's more than enough evidence for the NFL to suspend Ezekiel Elliott.
Why don't we go ahead and move on? Because this is a story we've been tracking for some time. I have a feeling it will pop up on future shows and future segments.
It's on its last legs, I think.
Yeah,
Hopefully.
I think right from the specifics of
Yeah.
the case, and like I'll keep my position that I've held since the first time we discussed this. As long as he misses games, I'm good. I really don't care. I'm mad that he played in the last game. I think it was a difference maker, and will be happy to see him miss the next games. The NFL at this point is a war of attrition, and I will take any advantage. But maybe that's too much football talk.
It's never enough football talk.
So we are going to transition into our next story, which is the Papa John's NFL sponsorship debate or proclamation or issue. This one doesn't need. I'll just go ahead and enter this so we can get into it. Because it doesn't need a lot of deep explanation. So Papa John's. And although how do you say his last name? The CEO, John, ...
I don't. Mr. Pizza.
Yeah, Papa John. Right, it's him, right? Same guy. So,
Yeah.
He's had a long relationship with the NFL, one of their key sponsors, big sponsors, and he made a claim probably 2 weeks ago, week and a half ago, somewhere in that neighborhood, sometime between our last episode and this one, where he was making a claim that the NFL anthem controversy and the surrounding issues was having a detrimental effect on his pizza sales during football season. And so this was, interesting proclamation, interesting take, and probably the loudest, at least publicly loudest, key NFL sponsor to weigh in on this controversy vis-a-vis his opinion / effect on his sales, and as a major sponsor commenting. I'm sure there's been lots of back channel, but in terms of going to the press and talking about this publicly, the first big sponsor. So I guess, we talk about a little bit, about his comments, the validity thereof, and just the, is this a crack in the wall with other sponsors, or is it a lone wolf, so to speak? Rich?
Well, I think this could be a situation where maybe Papa John's is saying, look, Goodell, you need to do something about this. How did this get so far? And again, we talked about this on the previous show about there are a lot of people who've been talking about boycotting the NFL and boycotting some of their sponsors. I don't know if this is anything organized or this happened by accident or this is happenstance, but there are some, and perhaps, and I don't want to speak for you, Steve, we've had this discussion, but there are some that think that Goodell has been weak on this and that this should have been stomped and stamped out months ago. And perhaps this is a moment of weakness and, like you said, Chris, a crack in the armor for Roger Goodell.
I think that there's two interesting sides of the story. Is number one, whether or not Papa John's can, the comments that were made, first of all, were not to the media. The comments that Mr. Pizza made, that Papa John made, were in a shareholder meeting or like a shareholder conference call, I guess. That's when he said what he said. And the interesting thing to me really isn't whether he can prove that from financial numbers or other statistical evidence. The interesting part to me is that he said it in the first place. Because, to my knowledge, this is the only sponsor that has said something like this, meaning that the NFL is hurting my business, that I can ever remember, basically ever. I can't remember any other sponsor ever saying it. And where he's going with this, Mr. Pizza, is he's saying that the NFL flag protests, anthem protests, is the cause of the downturn in his business. That's what Mr. Pizza is saying. And so I think the idea that we have a major title sponsor, accusing the NFL of hurting their business is one half of it. And then the other half that's interesting is what Rich alluded to, which is now we have NFL fans that are really mad at Papa John's because they view this as a implicit or indirect attack on the rights of the players to kneel for the anthem, which has caused a bit of, I don't know, racially based acrimony. Is that the best way to say it? So to me, it's a two-sided story.
And I think it's important to say, I mean, he knows if he says it in a stakeholders update conference call meeting, it's going to go public, right? Like, so I mean, he knew that would hit the press. So he's a smart enough guy to know that the stakeholder meetings are theoretic, are open anyway, knowing that stakeholders then can do whatever they want with that information. So it was essentially an official leak, if nothing else. So he knew it would be a story within 6 hours. So we should.
I just meant that it was more of an official statement,
right?
Yeah, it's not. He's not talking to the USA Today or whatever. It's sort of an official pronouncement. That's what I meant. But go ahead.
So I just think he knew what he was doing in terms of that. It's fascinating. I'll skirt some of the. I actually think that I'll skirt some of the overt sort of national political issues on this one. I mean, Mr. Pizza, Papa Pizza, is a well-known and vocal conservative. He's made no secret of that over many years. So on many issues and at many times, it's kind of it's Chick-fil-A of pizza. So.
Well, it's a little different. Let's clarify that because Chick-fil-A is a closely held company. E-Truett Cathy and or his family owns Chick-fil-A, and then Papa John's is publicly traded, I believe, and has shareholders. So the Chick-fil-A guy can say whatever he wants, sort of without repercussion amongst his shareholders, investors at least. And whereas the Chick-fil-A guy is free to say whatever, and it's just a business impact. So there's a difference.
Yeah, I'm talking about more speaking to it almost as much marketing, not talking about the legal part of it. Okay. So there's that's a big part of both of those brands' market share and continuing marketing presence. So so. Even if he thinks that it's hurting his pizza, which maybe it is, I don't have enough data to be able to parse the numbers to say it is or isn't. Even if he thinks it is, he also knows that in his position, having a statement about it is going to be important for his marketing brand. And in this sort of, NFL's nexus of culture war right now, that it's behooving to him from a marketing standpoint to have a kind of stance on this. Whether the data backs up his sales figures or not is sort of irrelevant.
Yeah, well, Papa John's pizza is nasty. First of all, I don't like it. So,
it's gross.
But I don't want to.
I ordered Papa John's 2 weeks ago or last weekend, by the way.
It's not very good. But yeah, I mean, it's this whole issue with player quote unquote protest anthem and whether it's hurting the NFL, and clearly there's evidence to show that it is. The bigger issue is that I think Goodell mishandled this once again. And we've talked about, well, we actually haven't talked about what he could have done or should have done. Maybe we've talked about it offline. But I do think that this is a very fascinating topic to see how long this continues to go on and if there are any other implications for any businesses to be affected.
I think it's suffice to say, I think that the three of us have widely divergent opinions on the politics of the anthem protests, which we can maybe save that for another day. But I think it's indisputable, in my view, that the whole controversy has hurt the NFL's business, and the way the NFL has handled the controversy is a major cause of the problem. And I think that's really what Mr. Pizza, and his name is, what is this, Rich? Is it John Schnatter?
Yeah, John Schnatter.
Yeah.
Schnatter.
Okay. That's whatever, however he pronounces his name. I like Mr. Pizza better. But I think really what he's saying or telling his shareholders, and it is a publicly traded company, by the way, is that the way that the controversy was handled is the cause of the problem. And I, in that respect, I 100% agree with him.
I think it's hard to dispute that at this point, regardless of your political views, entry into the particulars of the issue. I think it's hard. How could you deny that it's having a negative effect? You can parse how, why, what perspective, but I think the debate is over about whether it's cast a pall on this season.
Well, and Chris, I don't think I did a good enough job of defending my view on the media on our last show. I don't want to relitigate that, but I think that the NFL's downturn in ratings have more to do with the protests than I really said on the last show. Just as an aside, I've listened back to that show. I sort of regretted my stance a little bit, but yeah, I think it's indisputable, and the idea that a sponsor has said it publicly, is the telling part. Now, I've read that the NFL's had to give some what's called givebacks to other sponsors, to Papa John's and maybe other sponsors, as per the agreements between the parties as a result of some of the downturn in ratings. So, that tells you something too. So what's the resolution of this? At this point, God only knows.
Well, I think some would argue that the resolution
I have a cynical view on his motives on two fronts. That doesn't necessarily mean that I am arguing that this is having a negative effect on the NFL. They can be separate things. And I think the only logical way, as we transition to our next topic, the only logical way to settle some of this is that the three of us do a blind pizza taste test on a future episode.
We can do that. Yeah, we'll all order. Either we get in the same room, which will be very expensive, or we'll all order pizza and do it together. Of course, it's a bit early. We're recording in the morning. It's a bit early for pizza right now, but I'm always game.
No, it's never.
So there you go. So look for that on a future episode as the only real way to settle the real dispute, which is the grossness level index of Papa John's pizza.
I told you I ordered it last weekend.
I know. Well,
me and my stepson ordered it, last Sunday, and I thought it was wonderful. Is it great pizza? No, but I don't think there's a lot of difference between Pizza Hut, Papa John's, and Domino's. It's all about the same.
All right, moving on. Now that everyone is hungry, to our next topic. It is a topic that we've actually done on the show in the past as well, and that is Roger Goodell's next commissioner contract with the NFL. If memory serves, the last time we talked about it being a bit of a fait accompli and a little bit of even raising some questions about whether it was smart to be that rubber stamping a contract for Roger Goodell at that time. I think it was right maybe at the end of the preseason, beginning of the season. We are in a very different spot now. Maybe we were being a little bit of a predicting the future, but
did you almost say proctologist?
Well, I was trying to say the other word that I knew I wasn't going to be able to pronounce, so I bailed. Prognosticator. There you go. And
proctologist is another thing entirely,
right? But still may actually be relevant to the situation going on with Goodell's contract. So there's a bit of doubt now and debate. Steve, you want to give us a quick intro about where the controversy is, and then we can get into the opining section.
Yeah, okay. So let's start at square one. Roger Goodell is the commissioner of the National Football League. He is an employee of the National Football League who was hired by the owners. The owners own the league. There are 32 owners. The owners get various tasks done amongst themselves by forming a number of committees, one of which is the Rules Committee, one of which is the Compensation Committee, and there are others. And so a lot of the more influential owners are on the more important committees. A guy like Dan Snyder is on a couple fringe committees and frankly isn't that relevant. Roger Goodell's contract is up in a couple years. I believe it's 2020. And so the owners wanted to extend him, which is why we brought it up before. The 32 owners have previously approved a Roger Goodell contract extension and delegated the job of getting the extension done to the compensation committee. There are I believe it's 5 owners on the compensation committee. Arthur Blank is one. Jerry Jones of the Cowboys basically ad hoc inserted himself into the compensation committee without being formally appointed to it, which is interesting. We're going to get to that here later. And so, really, from the NFL perspective, there really isn't a dispute because the contract has the idea of an extension has been approved and they're just talking numbers. So that's kind of the intro to it. And when we talked about it before, it was sort of a fait accompli, as you said, for that reason. Now, the controversy in it is that the NFL has been mired in all sorts of bad this year and last year in particular that we've talked about ad nauseum. And so really the question is, despite the money, has Roger Goodell done a good job of positioning the NFL for its success in the future? I think that's the question. The numbers and stuff don't interest me. I mean, Goodell's going to make a ton of money. He's made like $200 million in his time, so that's less interesting to me than sort of the fundamental question, which is really what Jerry Jones is raising is, has the NFL placed itself in good hands with Roger Goodell at the helm at all? The majority of the owners seem to think so. At least one doesn't.
I think the jury is still out on that, and no pun intended. With ratings slipping, there is the NFL definitely has a public. I think it has an image problem, and to me, I think that question would best be answered if the owners are the owners seeing a decline in their profits because it's all about money. But I think that if the owners are so united in giving him an extension, then either they are making money and they don't care, and B, they don't care about public image, or they feel like this stuff will pass. So if they do approve an extension, then I think that whatever happens to the NFL moving forward, I think if it's negative, then I think the owners get everything that they deserve because they have an opportunity to get someone else in.
Well, first of all, the NFL isn't losing money. The NFL revenues are increasing, and that's because of the TV revenue. Sort of the question from my perspective isn't the today, it's the 10 years from now. From the issues we're raising, we've raised, the anthem protest has turned people off. The CTE issue has turned people off in a major way. There's a massive multi-billion-dollar lawsuit involving former players with that. And so there's a lot of issues, and the public, I think the public hatred of Roger Goodell is a bit irrational, and it's a bit of groupthink at this point. It's sort of in vogue to hate Roger Goodell from a fan perspective. I don't know why the fans hate him. I really don't. I mean, what has he done to you? The dislike is really from the player perspective because of the discipline, but I don't know why the fans think he's so awful.
Well,
Chris? Rich?
I think he's awful.
Go ahead, Chris.
And I think if you look at what his job is, he has been good for the owners and has done a bunch of stuff that would make them happy and increase revenues. So, it's hard to criticize him there, at least retroactively. I think you could I think that between Ray Rice, Tom Brady, and a bunch of other things, he continues to make fairly easy situations to deal with worse by his own bumbling and PR gaffes that I think is where he gets the sort of residual fan anger, because he just looks like an idiot. In a couple of these high profile cases, he lets hubris and overreach guide his decision making, and then at least from a public relations standpoint, he does not look confident and secure in his own decision making, and he looks like a bumbler. Now, you could make a case that that's been fine from the owner's perspective, and that he has protected the shield and the bank that the shield represents. But I think what maybe owners are starting to catch up with, and why this has now gone thrown into slam dunk to question, is can the league going forward continue to have the bumbler perception and the bumbler reality as the hill becomes steeper? When everything's flush, that can cover a lot of problems. But CTE, changing media landscape, politics, blah blah blah, like the sledding ahead to stay this dominant is tough, and I think they're starting to wonder if he actually has the internal fortitude to take them through those waters.
Yeah, I mean, now Jerry Jones has threatened a lawsuit over this. Personally, I don't see, me as an attorney, I don't quite see what his causes of action are with regard to this lawsuit. I mean, you could file anything, but I'm not sure he has a cause of action. I think it's more just a threat, more so than a legitimate legal argument. But sort of the point he's making is that he thinks that Goodell's contract needs to have some performance-based measures involved in it, rather than just sort of a carte blanche to run the thing as he sees fit for the next several years. I don't necessarily disagree with him in that point, because I think you're right, Chris. The shield has been tarnished a little bit at this point, and it's not just, an inaccurate perception. The shield has been tarnished, and some of these things aren't going away anytime soon. So what Jones wants isn't necessarily completely. It's not a ridiculous notion, but the simple fact of the matter is the compensation committee has the authority to do the contract, and they're probably just going to do it.
Well, so. I think that the question that's fascinating to me is, Steve, you mentioned that the NFL is not losing money. But
no, they're making the revenues are increasing because of the TV revenue.
So then the question is, how then is the NFL still making money if viewership is decreasing?
Well, it's because the contract specifies how much they're going to get paid. Because I've said this on the show before, in my dealings with the NFL, and I have dealt with the NFL and a couple of teams from in my course of my legal career, they are the 800-pound gorilla in this. They don't compromise very well. That's not what the NFL is about, and we see that in some of these public issues. Right. But if I had to guess, I would say that these TV rights agreements are probably fairly slanted towards the NFL in terms of payments and givebacks and all that kind of stuff. So the question really isn't now. The question is the next round of media negotiations. What happens?
Well, I mean, let's common sense. Sometimes we make things more complicated than they have to be. I think, Chris, you laid out some very clear examples of where Roger Goodell has stumbled, particularly with Deflategate. I think some would say he stumbled with this anthem protest, and in some instances with discipline, with some of the disciplinary action. But I just don't understand why he makes things so difficult for himself and for the league. But I just think that it cannot continue to be all about money, in my opinion, if the NFL is to survive. I think the players will galvanize themselves, and I think that's something to watch as we creep up on the next negotiated agreement, is how will the players assert their power and assert themselves in this next wave of contract negotiations. I think that's going to be critical.
See, I think this is where you and I maybe diverge in our opinions here, Rich, because I don't think the players have the ability to galvanize themselves. I think they're not in a position of strength when it comes to bargaining, and I think the players have shown time and time again, year after year, contract after contract, that they aren't willing to stand up and do what it takes to get a contract favorable to them. And the reason, I think, fundamentally is that, these players aren't rich people, when compared to owners. The owners can have the NFL go away and they'll still be billionaires. These players have NFL jobs go away, and, some of them aren't even college graduates. They don't have life skills. They most certainly aren't going to make hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars. And NFL careers being so short, I think, if they stand up and they truly strike for a year or 2 years, that's an entire career for some of these people. So I don't think anything is going to change noticeably on that front, because I personally don't think the players really have it in them to get that done, and the owners will, as they should, take advantage of it.
So I think we should, I think what we could do is take that little snippet, when you said the players don't have it in them, and send it to Michael Bennett and Earl Thomas and Richard Sherman and some of those other players, and I think that might galvanize them to say, "Oh, you don't think we have it in them?" Let me correct you. I actually agree with you. You can't sign off on an agreement and then bitch and complain about it after the fact. It just doesn't work that way. I mean, you signed the CBA. You weren't very unified and galvanized. So I agree 100%. You can't come back and whine and complain about it now. However, the landscape of the NFL has changed. The landscape of the country has changed, and they do have the power. They just don't realize it, and they don't have the as you said, and just like us, you and I have bills. I can't walk away from my job without some major issue. I'm not going to do that without something that is so convicted in my soul that I can afford to lose pay and completely change my lifestyle. But let's make no mistake. They have it in them. They have the power to do it. They just don't know it.
Well, first of all, if anybody could send that snippet to Michael Bennett, please do. Because I would love to debate Michael Bennett. I think he's not very bright, and I think he's a race baiter and a liar. I do.
No way. No.
Richard Sherman is controversial, but he's an intelligent guy. I respect Richard Sherman in some ways, but Michael Bennett I have no respect whatsoever for. So I would love nothing better than to have him sit right in front of me and debate him. So please send it to Michael Bennett. First of all, but I mean, I don't have anything new to say. I mean, yeah, could they do it? Yes. Will they do it? No. That's my thought.
So I would love to and agree with Rich, although I think I agree with Steve in terms of their actual power, leverage, and negotiation. But we will see. I think there's two things, and then maybe I'll take it in a slightly different direction. One thing I think that is important, what I think a lot of people are struggling with, is if you look at the history of the NFL, you have two pretty powerful commissioners. Obviously, Pete Rozelle, this is Pete Rozelle's league still to this day. He built the house. And Tagliabue was a very effective commissioner who also kind of created some of the modern media landscape of that. He built a nice extension on Rozelle's house. People's problem with Goodell is he's a handler. He's just there to maintain. And we're entering into a very uncertain future of the NFL, and he's not viewed as a visionary, someone who can creatively solve problems, someone who can look steps ahead like the past commissioners or what the league actually needs. And I think that's what, from all corners, people are starting to wonder about. How is he gonna fix the big issues that get the next big TV deal, that get the next CBA? I think the trust to do those things, about being able to be a visionary leader for the league, is what's in doubt at all corners. Now, I think where we are, that his contract represents why we're having these discussions, is I think Jerry Jones is leading a very active fourth quarter coup against the commissioner, based not necessarily on whether he thinks he can handle the future of the league and has the future of the league at heart, because he is so upset about the Ezekiel Elliott situation that he has now pulled a number of strings, some that he has and some that he made up vis-a-vis being on a committee that he's not on, to lead a very aggressive last-second push to oust this guy. And he's weaved in his anger about Ezekiel Elliott through Papa John's, through taking advantage of the anthem controversy, to sowing discontent with Goodell in an attempt to get him out, not out of any high-minded stance on any of the issues I just said, including the future of the NFL, because he is so upset about Ezekiel Elliott that he has been a chaos agent through all of these stories, and it is the throughput. If I'm like a character in The Wire or True Detective, imagine me sitting there with photos and yarn, on a big, pinup board. And to me, all of these things go to Jerry Jones, and he may win.
I don't know if he's going to win. I think he's definitely not going to win, but I don't totally disagree with you, Chris. I think certainly his anger over the Ezekiel Elliott case is driving some of this, and I think you'd be a fool not to think that some of this Papa John's stuff Jerry hasn't had private talks with, because he's a major shareholder. He's a major owner. I don't know if he's a shareholder, but I know he owns a bunch of Papa John's franchises.
Over 100.
So, yeah, so certainly there's some back channel stuff there, but there's no way he's going to win. He's one of 32 voices. From what I understand, he has a handful, maybe at most, of owners that are on his side. I don't think, unless he really has some novel, unique legal argument that I'm not aware of, I don't think he's going to file a lawsuit and win, and nor do I think he wants to do that, because that's be really awful for the NFL. So I think it's all posturing, and I think at the end of the day, the Goodell extension is going to get done, whether or not Jerry likes it. But I understand.
And also,
point,
how much damage does he do, right? And I think some of his moves, like locking arms 1 week, saying he's against it the next week, I think a lot of his moves, I think the back channel with Papa John's, are to sow discontent with Goodell, which also continues to not let them be a league that circles the wagons and actually gets proactive in how they solve and fix their problems. So he may not win in terms of contract signed, and I see that Jones and Arthur Blank are already now sniping at each other, right? So there's you're starting to see some pretty high profile owner cracks, but through this chaos campaign, which I think he's sowing, the league actually, no matter what happens, the league is just another pretty deep black eye on the league.
Yeah, and just incidentally, the compensation committee is Arthur Blank, Robert Kraft, Bob McNair, John Mara, Clark Hunt, who's Kansas City Chiefs, and Art Rooney. So 5 of the most influential owners in the NFL, who are in some cases every bit as influential as Jones. So it's not like he's going up against a bunch of pushovers.
No, but if he sows their infighting, it has almost some of the same negative effect.
I still think that if the NFL thinks that they're going to be able to continue to weather these storms with the public, I think that viewership will continue to drop, except among hardcore football fans like myself. I'm always going to watch football, so I get in debates all the time on social media. I was attacked last week, actually 2 weeks ago, when I posted a picture of my wife at the Redskins Dallas game, and I was called all kinds of sellouts and this and that because I'm supporting the NFL. But that's a whole nother discussion. But I don't think the NFL can continue to weather these PR nightmares and moving forward in the future. And
you have you're maybe the most high profile owner now who is intentionally continuing to stoke fires. It's not a good look.
Yeah.
Yep. Let's make that the last word.
Sure. Let's move on from the NFL and return. Haven't done this in a few episodes, but we will return to As the LeVar Ball Family Turns. As last seen, looking at some fairly frivolous and funny goings-on of the Ball family, but things have turned more serious in the land of China, where it looks like there is a shoplifting controversy with the UCLA basketball team and the current Ball player on that team. This looks like, well, first of all, when you shoplift in foreign countries, ones that we don't also have the greatest relationship with, that's just a level of dumb that I cannot even imagine for a pair of sunglasses, which is what it turns out to be, at least the one item we know has been named.
Agreed.
So, I mean, this is just, there is no smart angle into this story, but it is the next installment in the drama.
Yeah, thank God for the Ball family, because it's just so much fun. I like LeVar, but, God bless LeVar Ball for all this nonsense. But, yeah, if any of you out there are contemplating a trip to a totalitarianism, totalitarian communist regime,
I was a poli-sci.
just remember, Just remember, I was having a pronunciation problem. Just remember not to commit a crime, okay? Because if you shoplift something in the United States, you lift a pair of sunglasses from the Louis Vuitton place in the mall. You're gonna probably be fined. You'll plead it down to misdemeanor. You'll pay a fine. You'll be done. Well, if this happens in China, you could be in jail for years. So just don't. It's just amazing to me that a guy like Leangelo Ball, who's a middle kid, who has more than enough money to buy any sunglasses he wants, would think it's okay to shoplift. Now, the update today on this is apparently there is video of them shoplifting in 3 different stores, not just the one sunglass hut. So as we sit here right now today, Leangelo Ball and the other 2 players who are not nearly as high profile are in house arrest in a city in China, and the UCLA basketball team is getting ready to leave them there and come back to the United States. The Ball family is in China currently, but from a legal perspective, from what I understand, I'm not licensed in China, from what I understand, they don't have a guilty until proven innocent system in China, and if you go to trial there is a 99.9% conviction rate. Not only that, but the penalties are much, much, much harsher. And so apparently he has the U.S. consulate is negotiating on his behalf, and they have enlisted a couple major rich Chinese companies to negotiate on their behalf to try to get them out of China. So we will see, but it is very likely he's going to be there for a few weeks at a bare minimum, and at worst, he's going to miss entire basketball career over a pair of sunglasses. So I hope it's worth it, or maybe multiple sunglasses.
So let me get it. So I think, Steve, you said that China doesn't have a guilty until proven innocent, or they don't have an innocent until proven guilty.
They don't have an innocent until proven guilty.
I think you said the opposite. Okay, so
did I? Well, if I did, I screwed it up. They are presuming you are guilty, and trials are not an adjudication of guilt or innocence. Trials, from a practical reality in China, from what I understand, are really just a punishment phase.
They deserve everything that they get. As Chris started off this segment, you have to be pretty dumb and arrogant to think that you could go to a foreign country and steal. And there are some people that think that they can do that. And then sometimes, as in the United States, we'll go and negotiate and try to, get them. But it's dumb. It's immature. We've all made mistakes. I don't think I've ever stolen, but I've made some mistakes before. But I just think that this is just another chink in the armor of the Ball family. Now, the joke on the internet is he's being called Leangelo Ball. So we'll see how that plays out.
I feel bad for him, in a sense. I mean, in that I don't want a kid to ruin his life over sunglasses. He's brought it all on himself, for sure. And particularly so, this is not a poor kid from the ghetto, as is the stereotypical basketball, player, whether or not that's true. This kid is wealthy, okay? LeVar Ball just bought a $5 million house in L.A. Yeah. He's making a lot of money. And, if LeAngelo Ball wanted some expensive frou-frou sunglasses, he could have absolutely just plunked down a credit card and bought them. So why he felt the need, he or his people with him, his fellow players, felt the need to do this is just incomprehensible, particularly in a communist country like China who controls every aspect of life. I just don't. It's just what a moron.
Yeah, if you can assume that there are shoplifting cameras at a mall in Anaheim, which you can bank on that there are. Imagine what in a country where surveillance is the norm, that you're going to be watched. I go to London, I know that I'm being tracked from block to block, let alone going into China. So it's absolutely insane. It's absolutely immature. I mean, I don't want these kids rotting in a Chinese prison, right? I'm confident that between the United States, UCLA, and other intermediaries, these kids can be brought home. Because I wouldn't wish that on anyone. But it also, again, and I'm a Ball fan, but you have to wonder at what level of privilege that these kids have at this point. that they have assumptions that the world doesn't touch them. And especially you could not get to a more foreign place politically, except for maybe some spots in the Middle East, where if your privilege and total disconnect with how the world works allows you to do anything short of jaywalking and maybe including it in a place like China, I mean, I don't even there's something wrong with how these kids are being raised, and I'm not the type to go there.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, if you shoplift in the Middle East, they're going to cut your hand off, so that may be worse there. But, yeah, I think you've said everything. What more can you say? It's just more drama. I don't feel bad for them in that shoplifting was moronic, particularly in China. But I don't want the kid to be in jail and rotting in a Chinese prison for years. I do hope they get him out of China for sure. So, I don't know. What more can you say?
And there's two other kids here that I'm assuming were followers. I mean, that's a big assumption on my part. But with the personality and celebrity of someone like Ball, I'm imagining players on the team are following his lead.
I don't know if he has that personality, though. LeVar Ball
I just mean
has
like the
personality.
whole, but he has it by default.
Maybe. Maybe. I mean, because Lonzo isn't brash, and LaMelo, who's the youngest kid, is brash. I don't know really anything about LiAngelo. He seems to be the opposite of brash. So maybe he is a follower. I don't know.
Well,
Who knows? We've said everything we can say.
I hope they come home, but geez Louise. Yeah. Pro tip for our listeners out there, in case you were wondering, when in foreign countries, especially ones that have that are politically restrictive at best and have a politically fraught relationship with the U.S. at best to follow local criminal statutes and laws while there. So that's our public service announcement from It's Just Business for this week.
Well said. Well
Just
said.
stay in your room. Just stay in your hotel room.
Right.
Order room service.
Yes.
It's amazing that the society we live in, we have to restate things like this. Like another one would be, men in the workplace maybe keep pants on. So we need these new rules to live by.
Yeah, that's for Hollywood people.
So just a couple simple ones. I'll be here in 2 weeks if we can give you an update on simple rules to live by. All right, so I think that brings us to the end of It's Just Business when we are getting to the drop trow portion of the show. So look forward to the game this week. Look forward to following all of these controversies. I have a feeling that by the time we reconvene in 2 weeks, we will have substantial updates on everything we just discussed.
All right.
Keep your pants on, people.
And guys, you can find me at DiscoQ5, DiscoQue5 on Twitter. Hit me up. I am starting to build a following. I think I have 85 followers now.
You'll get there, Rich.
Okay. So I'm at ChrisLarry33 on both Instagram and Twitter. And not to brag, but I think I'm closing in on 2,000, Rich.
Yeah, I didn't import my other social media friends to Twitter, so I think I would be up there, but on purpose, because I like to just talk about sports and not other stuff on Twitter.
And on Twitter, I am at, we'll keep that to myself. I am at the Hawkseye on Twitter, and that's it.
All right. Well, we will see you in 2 weeks. Talk to you then.
All right, guys.